much, Gabe. I appreciate it. I did want to mention as well too, lately we've been trying some different things out. We recorded the last session and on Redis, and we put that out on our YouTube channel. We're going to go ahead and try recording this one as well. If you have any concerns about that, please go ahead and message me. We're just playing with some new ideas, doing some experimenting. And if anybody doesn't feel comfortable or they, want to ask a question that they don't want to be in public, that's cool. I can edit things out, no problem at all. But just want to share the good knowledge with folks.
Can we do a Mystery Science Theater 3000 version after we've recorded it?
Yes, I love it. And if anybody picks up the MST3K references, let me know and we will give you a prize later on. So I actually saw MST3K came to my college back in the day. So yeah, shows how old I am. All right, I'll quit talking and hand it over to Charlotte and Matt.
All right, hello. I guess I also realized as we were talking that Matt and I didn't put like a little intro slide. So I guess we should do that. So hi, I am Charlotte Chang. As Dustin said, I work with Matt and Dustin at Industrial Logic. I have been sort of in this space for what feels like a very, very long time, probably about 18 years. And I'm particularly passionate around the topic that we're going to talk about today, because I really enjoy thinking about what's required with teams and people to do awesome work, right? And that's, not only employees, but also clients.
I'm Matt, and I own a horse stables, and I do some permaculture and homesteading, like mild consulting. And when I'm not doing all that, I work with Charlotte and Dustin at Industrial Logic. That's more inverted than I'd probably like it to be. I actually do more. Yeah, I've also been at this for a very long time and happy to be here. So
awesome. Okay, so we're excited to be here. I posted a link to a deck. You all should all have edit access to this as well, which we'll find out shortly if you do. I will also share my screen since this is being recorded. It'll make the recording a lot more interesting. All right, can you all see my screen? Yes. Okay, thank you. All right, here we go. So what we're going to cover today is these 6 things: why constructive candor, experiences with feedback and personal growth, setting up for constructive candor, what are some characteristics of it, how to master it, and then some takeaways, since we appreciate having things that are actionable. So the first thing we'll start off with is why constructive candor. I guess what I wanted to do is share a little bit about how we got to this topic. And as I think like Dustin was saying, there's a lot of books out there, there's a lot of articles, there's a lot of opinions out there about how to give feedback and how to receive feedback. And so we were having this really great conversation about it. And we were actually really talking about this idea of the compliment sandwich versus radical candor. So by show of hands, how many of you, or icons, or emojis, whatever you feel comfortable with, how many of you have heard of the compliment sandwich? Okay, yeah, I'm seeing some. All right, cool. Yeah. All right. So, the compliment sandwich is basically some sort of complimentary thing. That's what you say first. And then you sort of give like a critique, the thing that you're trying to get feedback on, in the middle. And then afterward is when you say something complimentary again. And the sort of the challenge or the critique that it is given around this is that it can seem disingenuous. Or it can seem like the compliments are like not actionable, and they're not related, right? And so a lot of the industry has moved toward something called radical candor, which is a very popular book that was referenced earlier. And actually this is what this book is talking about. It's sort of like this quadrant, and what they're talking about specifically is this idea of ruinous empathy. So the empathy is not even helpful because it is, it's not, again, for the reasons that we just talked about. And so Matt and I were talking about this, and then we ended up talking about what's wrong with both of these things. And really, while both the compliment sandwich and radical candor, I don't think either one of the intents are intended to go incorrectly, but often in practice, they end up not being great, because while the compliment sandwich can seem disingenuous, radical candor can often come across as just like, I'm going to yell at you. But you have to listen to me because I'm being radically candid. So really, like, that's not great either. And so through that discussion, Matt and I thought that there's probably a lot of people out there that are thinking about this, and what do we think makes feedback, constructive. Okay. So with that, we'd like to start a little, we like, our talks to be interactive. So we'd like to understand a little bit about your experiences with feedback first. So you can tell us a little bit about, some of your experiences with receiving feedback. Was it well received? Was it useful? Every time you've been given feedback, has it been great? Has it been like really awesome? Loved it?
Do you want people to come off mute and talk?
Yes, please.
All right. So I'll tell you what times that I really appreciate feedback and act on it is when I've asked for it. So I seek it, right? So I say, hey, we just got done with this talk. What ideas do you have to make it better? Or like, how did it resonate with you? So when I get feedback that I've been seeking out, it's the most impactful for me.
I like it. That's a good one. Does anyone else have any other feedback experiences?
I would say surprise feedback is not very good. Like, I've had a review where I was just kind of floored by some of the feedback that I got and was not expecting it and wasn't able to really do anything with it.
Oh, both those things are sort of not great, right? Like sort of being surprised and the fact that there was nothing you could do with it. Yeah. Cool.
I've had an experience with feedback where the feedback was really vague and inspecific, and it gave me no idea on what I needed to do. It was just there.
Yeah. Yeah. Not actionable is definitely a theme, it sounds like, with this group, but also in general. And so these are some of the things that Matt and I have come across also in talking with others, and that, I'd say we've experienced too as humans and professionals. So then, what are some of the challenges that you all have faced in giving feedback? Have you all been in a situation before where you've had to give feedback, and what were some of the things that you found difficult?
Yeah, I've had to give feedback before that needed immediate attention, and it can be tough in a group setting because you don't want to, put them in an awkward situation in front of a group instead of a one-on-one, but sometimes it needs to happen.
Yeah, that sounds really tough, actually. A group setting sounds really, really hard. Yep. Mm-hmm. And
sometimes,
also the immediacy.
Sometimes people get automatically on the defensive when you try to have a one-on-one conversation with them too.
Yeah. Yep.
I've seen some people when I've tried to schedule one-on-one conversations where they will they'll try to book it for a large group, And you kind of wonder, are you doing that because you're trying to avoid the uncomfortableness of it, or what is the problem? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, I think what we're identifying really is that, I mean, feedback is hard, whether it's receiving it or giving it. And again, that's another reason why we have been really interested in this topic and where this blog post came from and this topic came from. And we'll share the blog post toward the end. But and so I guess the first thing we want to say is that, you know, I think what we're all experiencing is pretty common, unfortunately. And it's generally experienced. One, a lot of people, you know, a lot of times people are promoted into sort of management type of responsibilities without where the responsibilities are about managing the work. They're not necessarily about equipping people with the skills to manage people. And so it's sort of the idea of managing people is sort of a secondary responsibility. So that's one thing that's really common. The other thing is, as people are sort of promoted, they're like us, right? They've never really experienced it being done well. I think it's an anomaly to have like really good feedback that is actionable, very clear, you know, where there's safety involved. So they don't have a model in which they can mimic either. Also, negative feedback isn't fun. I mean, even the person that had mentioned, you know, the need to give immediate feedback in a group setting, right? Like even you, it's sort of mentioning, like, you're like, I don't really want to do this right now, but we have to do this, right? And also personalizing feedback takes effort, right? I mean, it's hard to really try to deliver a message and think about the receiver and to think about how they're gonna receive the information and how to really, you know, deliver that message so they can hear it and do something with it. And that's hard. And the last thing is that, again, talent growth is a lot of times more about the company's needs and not the growth of the individual. So if we think a lot about where professional development, you know, sort of lives, a lot of times it's not really even within the team. It's like in part of the organization that's not even involved with the day-to-day work. And not only that, it is a lot of times the feedback is around what the company needs, what the organization needs, and not really even considering what that individual may want or what that individual needs or why they're needing this feedback to begin with. All right, so we've talked a little bit about sort of where it goes wrong and how we've experienced it sort of poorly. And so what we'd like to do now is on slide 14, we have these virtual Post-it notes. And we'd like you all, feel free to, you know, click on one of them. You should be able to move them if you want. But really what's more important is that you can type in them. And what we'd like to ask you is, what are some common elements of good feedback? So we'll give you like a couple minutes to type in here, to type in the Post-it notes. And you can think about either, you know, when you've had a successful time giving feedback or like, you know, when you've received feedback, like you all were mentioning, so. Or actually even when you haven't and what you would have preferred. I also like that, you know, because Google makes everyone sort of anonymous, that someone is an anonymous Python, but I like that we're at a .NET user group. That makes me very happy. I sort of wish that they had just all taken random programming like language themes and frameworks and stuff. That would have been so good. All right, so just to summarize, and I think we talked a bit about this earlier, but a lot of you feel that good elements of good feedback is specific and actionable. It is clear and concise direction that has an actionable result. I like this one, that you yourself or the person that's receiving the feedback agrees that something needs to be changed. That's really good. Or type that. Timely, that's a really good one too. I feel like that almost goes with actionable a little bit. If you get feedback that's like a year later, wow. I mean, I can barely remember what I did last week. And I think that goes back to whoever said earlier, this idea of it could be related to when that person said that they were surprised about the feedback during their review, because that feedback could have been like a year ago, right? Again, and you asked for it, which is really nice. I also like that it's clearly indicated that this is feedback. Like sometimes it's so subtle that you don't know what, if they're actually trying to say something or they're just providing an opinion. All right, awesome. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Barcomb.
I was going to see who you chose to. Yeah. So this is the definition.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Chad A.
I was waiting. Chad A. So this is what feedback is, according to Oxford, whatever Oxford knows about it. But I don't know, it's kind of interesting. As we've gone through these activities, we've seen what you guys have both experienced and shared, and some stuff that we've experienced and shared. Looking down on slide 16, I was curious, like these are some actual quotes that we've heard, and I've heard versions of these things multiple times in different contexts. But I'm curious, when when you read these, like, you should speak more in meetings, what are some of the problems with that statement as feedback? If someone just told that to you, Dustin, you should speak more in meetings.
Okay.
Like any meetings, like all of them.
All of the meetings, say more words, all the words.
It's very vague.
Like a joke of the day, you could say that provide at all meetings.
Yeah, that'd be great. More words. This was a colleague, and they were very frustrated because they didn't feel like they had anything to say. Then they didn't feel that they didn't speak up when something needed to be said. But and what was interesting is trying to unpack this with that person's manager. They were actually, the part of the feedback was they were a little worried because they understood that in their culture, if you didn't show up more and be more like the current perceived leaders, that you might get looked over and passed over, and people wouldn't understand why you were there and how to contribute. Is that right or wrong? It's also neither here nor there, because I think the manager was probably rightly identifying that people didn't understand why that person was there, and that was the problem. But it was framed in a weird way that the feedback wasn't clear about what the actual problem was. There weren't really any evidence or examples given, what kinds of things should we say, how to coach on that. I love this one. I've seen many versions of number 2. You didn't handle the project well. How could that be improved? Any ideas?
We should blame Dustin's son. That's my.
You
idea.
put Dustin on the project, so clearly it was, yeah.
Yeah. Like, what part of the project didn't Dustin's son do well? All of it.
Again, right? This is the 3rd time we've told you. Yeah, again, sort of lacking from specificity. There's a lot of things like that in all 3 of these examples. I don't think you're ready to be a manager. What's it going to take? It's what I want to do. What can I do differently? Things like that. All right. Moving into like some of the characteristics of candor, of constructive candor, that we think are important. So I'm not sure any of these things are mind shattering, but it was interesting enough for us to talk about and write about and then put together a presentation about. So I think when we're talking about it, a lot of these things have already been touched on with regards to things like timeliness and some stuff maybe around like invitation or seeking the advice. But even before about giving the feedback itself, setting up for the feedback or thinking about the setting or the environment for the feedback. Have you ever been given feedback when you just, maybe it was good feedback, maybe it was feedback you ultimately could appreciate, but when you were given the feedback, you were not in the right place to hear it. You just literally couldn't hear it. You couldn't mentally process it. That's what this first point is all about, is trying to take the point, if you're giving feedback, understand where they might be mentally and emotionally, even prior to getting in the feedback. That's a little bit adjacent to, but separate from thinking about what type of state the feedback would put them in also. But take the time to understand where they're at first. I was in a situation where I had to give feedback to somebody, and they just had a family tragedy, and it didn't matter. Literally, at that point, the feedback, it didn't matter, and it wasn't going to be heard anyways. So there was also levels of appropriateness in there that even I could tell were important. So that's a big sign. Consider the settings, the surrounding privacy. We talked about group feedback. Sometimes it's not avoidable, but is one-on-one better than group? Is group more appropriate than one-on-one? Sometimes there would be reasons you would choose one over the other. So there's not always a right answer. What about noise? What about privacy? What about even things like, well, I had them come into my office and I had them shut the door, so it's private. Well, except you're the kind of boss who never talks to anybody unless there's a problem, and you've all got glass doors and windows. So what does everybody know when now you're in the office talking to the boss? Like, you're in trouble or you effed something up. So, thinking about all of those things are important. Providing an opportunity for the receiver to be present and hear the feedback, and then be available as possible afterwards. So I think one of the biggest problems with feedback is it feels a little bit like seagull feedback. Like, I'm your boss, I'm your manager, I come in, Dustin, you're screwing this up again, blah, blah, blah. And that's it. That's your feedback. And even if it's useful, even if it's like, hey, you're screwing things up this way, like I told you to write .NET code, you're still slinging VB, like it's, never going out of style. Just kidding. But
Classic
yeah,
Dustin.
classic that. Yeah, oh, can't that guy. But then what? Like, if you need help with the feedback, did even ask if you agree with the feedback? Do you need help with the feedback? Do you understand why I'm giving you this feedback? And if it was obvious, I probably wouldn't be needing to give you feedback in the first place. So like, clearly, how can I help continue to create a supportive environment for the feedback to be internalized, processed, and actual outcomes changes to happen? Some of the characteristics of constructive candor, a lot of these things you've already kind of touched on, which is awesome because it's super validating for us that we didn't write a fake blog, but be specific and fact-based. So, those examples, like, you're not going to make a good manager, or that project, you didn't run that project well. What? And so we want specificity and we want examples, but I think there's this little subtlety about just being specific, but being specific about the facts. So try to share the things that did happen, right? And when we talk about fact, like, it's also one of my fun things to mostly teach my children to argue with their teachers about is like, your opinions are facts, that they're your opinions, right? So it's fair to say, you made me feel this way, or if someone else shared with you that a person made them feel that way, it is their feelings, and maybe it's not fact, but it's fact that somebody was made to feel that way. A perception is the fact that the perception itself was real, that you had this perception. I believe it's a fact that I believe that Dustin should speak up more in meetings. It might not be right. I might be completely omitting Mark, but I have my reasons or rationale for it. So try to, when you can stick to real facts, things that were observable and true and are very not like arguable or in debate, that's better. When you are sharing a thing that's more of like an emotion or an impression or perspective feeling, I think it's also important to be real, both with yourself and with the person you're giving feedback to, that it is just your perception or just your response to a thing that you saw. So even if you think it's important, you're also couching it and you're giving a little bit of wiggle room in terms of how that thing could be perceived in other ways, and allowing them to possibly share their perspective in other ways of seeing that as well. Slide 20. Oh, I jumped the gun. Framing feedback with perspective and context. So part of it, understanding the facts around the perspective that you had, is making sure that you do a good job exploring other perspectives and the context. So sometimes you'll find that you have one perspective, but you also only ever see a person in one context, or you only ever seen it in a context one time. So looking for things like patterns and repetition, and seeing if other people experience the same kind of like an issue in other contexts, and having, clearly trying to take a more participative approach to see if there's other contexts where, if they agree with this, that it's either amplified or dampened in other contexts. And then kind of last but not least, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but be involved with the path forward. I want to be a little bit cautious about this, because I don't mean to say it's your job to do the correcting or the improvement for the other person. It doesn't even necessarily mean that you have to be the coach or the whatever, but like, I think if you know that you're not the best person to help with whatever the feedback was, I think being involved with helping connect that person with the right path is really important. And I think part of that being supportive is like, if it's appropriate and possible, like checking in with that person as they're on whatever path of processing, internalizing, and possibly correcting that feedback is. It's a little bit of just authentic behavior, and hopefully responsibility and empathy as well. That's all of them, all three together. Boom. So an interesting part of this, and it's kind of shifting gears a little bit, is what I found after being in multiple positions of having to give feedback personally, and as Charlotte and I were kind of exploring this topic, is I think one of the things that can make feedback feel uncomfortable, if we're trying to be very good and honest and thoughtful about our feedback, is it requires self-reflection. If I'm going to give you feedback, I think Dustin didn't run that project well. Well, maybe that's on me. Like, why do I think that? Maybe he thinks that, like, if he thinks the project went well, maybe other people also agree with different folks. But like, why do I think that? So I think if you're doing a good job reflecting on this and being truly introspective about why do you have the impressions or thoughts or feelings that you did, I think that is a big part of being a little bit more responsible and authentic in the feedback. If you have, like, who has the responsibility to give feedback, I think that sometimes you're supposed to in your job. We kind of talked about earlier how sometimes it feels like it's a secondary consideration. By the way, you can always tell if you think someone in your organization can get promoted because they were great with their people but didn't deliver their work. If those people can still get promoted, then it's not a secondary consideration. If no matter what, if being great with people is icing on the cake, but ultimately you have to get your deliverables done in order to get promoted, then it's probably a secondary consideration. There's probably some shades of gray in there, but sometimes there's official responsibility. It's supposed to be your job to do this. But I think, like, all the things that we talked about with regards to timeliness and all those things, like thinking about what does it mean to be responsible with giving feedback. It doesn't matter what your policies are. If you know a better way, if you've been trained, if you've been to presentations, if you've read books, I believe it's your responsibility to think about how you're giving feedback and be reflective if you're really doing that job as well as you could be, and then own that it is your role to do that. If it's not your official responsibility, it gets a little bit more questionable, especially if there's I don't know, it can lower your emotional energy to do so. But sometimes people need to be given feedback, both positive and negative, by the way. And I think it's easier with positive feedback because everybody loves that. But trying to find out whether or not you feel like it's somebody needs to give the feedback, and maybe you're not supposed to, like, it's not your quote unquote job, but maybe you're actually the person in the best position to give the feedback. Maybe a person can hear it better coming from you. Maybe you're the one that had the observations and have the facts and can share things that would, actually make a difference to the person, because it'll increase the ability to be heard and acted on. And then I think the compliment sandwich definitely kind of steps into this authenticity space, because part of my initial reaction was, depending on how it's framed, when the compliment sandwich has been fed to me, used on me, I'm not sure how you'd frame that, I've never liked it. And I think that was part of the conversation, because it always felt like some of the things that Charlotte called out, even though it started well intended, it became a frame that some people just felt that they had to use, and the positive things felt inauthentic. So some of the authenticity, I think it's easier. I think authenticity is easier when you actually care. I'm not sure if in all of our jobs we all are afforded the luxury of actually caring as much as we would need to for the other human. But that's where we almost have to fall back on like principles and responsibility. You can still authentically care that as a human, no matter what they're like person, but as a human, that they are given feedback in a constructive way and are given the opportunities to improve. You could kind of golden rule this, like just treat them how you'd want them to be treated. You give them the kind of feedback though that you'd want to be given the feedback, the environment, and all those other things. The other thing that Charlotte pointed out really well when I was really kind of pushing for authenticity is she's like, yeah, but I've met people that can authentically be an asshole. And I'm like, I feel seen. And so I think thoughtfulness.
I'm not really mean, I swear. I swear.
She's not really mean. She's actually really kind. But we agreed that thoughtfulness, like authenticity, is possible. But part of the self-reflection is thinking about, being kind. This doesn't mean you have to, go overboard and, be. It doesn't have to be more than just being a thoughtful person about the authentic and hopefully responsible interactions that you're having, during a feedback session or multiple feedback sessions. And I guess like coming in, so this is sort of like the setting up and sort of what we thought of as the basics. So kind of coming into mastering constructive candor. And I do think there's a mastery technique. I think feedback itself it's a craft, it's a skill, it's a technique. And you can go to a presentation or you can read a book. And one of the biggest challenges that I think we have with feedback is we don't get a lot of opportunities to practice. So if that middle section that we just went through is sort of the 101 section, this is more of like the 201 stuff. Have you guys ever done like Strengths Finder or like positive psychology or any books or articles around that kind of stuff? If so, that's what this one's all about, like adopting a strengths-based strategy. Now, that doesn't mean if somebody's so part of strengths is admitting what you're not strong at and then coming up with a plan to account for that. But what strengths usually means is don't spend a ton of time trying to get better at something that you're at best going to maybe someday be mediocre at, right? That's why we work with the teams. That's why we work with other people. That's why we choose different paths or environments that amplify the strengths that we do have. So adopting a strengths-based strategy is a big part of thinking about both yourself and the context around the individual when giving feedback. Slide 26, be humble and be balanced, right? So not necessarily balanced, again, not in an inauthentic way. If you view the compliment sandwich that way, or if you are going to use the compliment sandwich, do it in a way that is authentic. And so you're finding a true good way to balance that, and be humble. And sometimes being humble can be very difficult when you're the official manager, like when you have the anointed power. It's you can't undo the power structures but what you can do is try to take a step back and remember that you're also just another human, that person is another full-grown adult. Usually, I mean, you could be giving feedback to children, but that's a different it's very similar, but it's a different type of situation. I think that too often in our culture, it's very common for managers, people whose part of their job is to have direct reports. It's very easy for people that have the word manager in their title to infantilize individual contributors. I've even heard, I hate this. I know a guy, he's an interesting guy. His heart's always in the right place, but he literally refers to his team or the people that he's working with as his kids. And they're all people like me and you, like they're all grown-ups, they've all got families of their own, they're all like trying to earn money and feed their family, and it's really, really disheartening because it's not just a phrase. You can actually tell in some of these behaviors that this gentleman feels that he is a little bit, he gets it, and you lower-minded humans, you clearly don't get it. So being humble and remembering that we're all humans and we're all in this together, and we've only got about 80 to 90 years on this rock, so we should enjoy the ride, right? Slide 27, servant leadership, the pillars. I think servant leadership has gone off in some weird squirrely ways, like where's the servant leadership, benevolent dictator, what are we trying to be? I like to frame servant leadership as when there is a function in most companies of management, and it needs to be done. Somehow the function of work management needs to happen. There's also the job of people management. There's the bad piece, like if someone comes in stumbling drunk, that has to be dealt with. If there's abuse or safety concerns, that has to be dealt with by somebody who can deal with that and how. I also feel that there's just the talent development side of people management, and people want to be grown and get better and figuring out how to create environments and experiences for that to happen. So when I think about a more modern framing of servant leadership, it's understanding how those functions fit together and which of those functions you contribute and how you fit into there. If you fit into all of them, maybe some of these things aren't your bag, and so you stay away from those types of roles or from those types of situations. But the servant leadership idea, I think, is pretty well understood. And then trying to find ways to apply that in ways that can fit you in your context and situation is important. And then last but not least, and I mean, a lot of you guys all called this out, but being action oriented, finding something that you can actually do. One of the things that Charlotte and I use as our own tool is, what's our next unblocked step? So there's every journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single shot or something like that. So the idea that like there's going to be some next thing that you can do. It's not going to be waiting on somebody else. It's not needing a decision. There's going to be, even if it's very small, there's some unblocked next step that you can take. And that's sometimes a useful frame for getting down the action-oriented path, but making sure that whatever the feedback is itself is action-oriented. And sometimes, we haven't really called it out specifically, but sometimes the action needs to be coupled, not necessarily a direct measurement, but how do you know progress is being made? So yes, you can say, hey, do this thing, but if you do a thing, how do you know that better happened? I'm not saying it has to be tracked, measurement like JIRA tickets or anything crazy like that, but making sure that part of action oriented is understanding that progress can be sensed by the recipient and by whatever pieces of the environment need to understand that progress is being made, if that makes sense. Alrighty, so kind of closing down, but on slide 29, we're going to ask you guys all of you various anonymous animals to jump back down to slide 29. And I'm just kind of curious. We've gone through a couple different ideas. We've heard from you guys on some other topics, so would love to take just a few minutes and close down with any takeaways. I'd be very curious if there's anything that you heard today that either made you go, oh, that's a new way of thinking about something, or if there's anything that you think you can actually try to do because of today. Or any questions?
I have a question of, do you have any tips for prepping yourself before you give feedback?
Ooh, like a playlist?
Not necessarily like a playlist, but more like questions that you ask yourself. Do that self-reflection bit before you give the feedback.
Yeah, that's a good question. I always start by questioning my truths personally. I kind of like to, sometimes I'll even journal or jot down, like, why do I think I need to give this feedback? Is it actually important? If I don't give this feedback, what could go wrong? Is it doing the person a disservice if I give the feedback? Or what happens if I just STFU? What if I don't, like, is it more about me or is it more about them? And then if it is more about them, like, why do I think what I think? So kind of questioning truths and thinking about the situation and doing that, like that perspective reflection, like, what did I see? What's a fact? What's my opinion? And sort of starting to sense all of that out. Can I think of examples and things like that? I don't know. How about you, Charlotte?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think of very similar to you, Matt. Like I like to think like, why do I think this? Like, why do I think what's happening? And then if we're directly involved in the situation, why am I perceiving this? And then if I wasn't directly involved, I start to think about perhaps where other people are coming from too. And then of course, my understanding is how the information is being presented to me. So why do I perceive the information in a certain way? And I think and I guess like going upon that, I do like to think about, okay, what are my biases? Why do I have those biases? Because I can only experience what I can experience. And I am in this physical world in a certain way, just like everybody is. So, am I experiencing something that other people are not, or vice versa? So I like to just like check, sort of like to check myself, right? And so I guess those are some of the questions that I start to think about. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was good.
If you're looking for playlist items, there's some good stuff by Eminem I could recommend.
Oh yeah, we could create a Spotify playlist or something.
Oh yeah, had like different kinds of feedback, like super impactful critical feedback.
Yeah.
Positive feedback. It's gonna be great. Yeah, I like it.
I like this, because then
Next
we can
time.
also order the tracks and we can have it mirror the emotional journey that giving feedback constructively, we could take, it would mimic basically a user journey and the emotional journey that they would take with the.
Lose yourself in the music, the moment. You own it. You better. Something about spaghetti.
I appreciate your creativity. That's a horrible idea. You shaved your head very nicely today.
I also appreciate your creativity. I don't know what to say critically right now.
You should have done that project better.
I should have done that. You should have done that. I'll point when I say it. You should have done that project better. I don't know. Okay, I'm terrible at this.
I love this question about how do you give feedback to someone that you can fire or someone that can fire you. Man, I feel bad because in fairness, I've not worried about that in a long, long time, because I always wanted to have enough liquid savings in the bank that I would never give a shit about that. So I don't know if that's a fair answer. So step one, have at least 3 months of liquid savings. I don't know if that's an option. But in more seriousness, depending on how sensitive they are and how truly worried you are with regards to safety and your paycheck, there's a certain line where, in my opinion, it's not worth it. You can't do it. Like, you're literally, if you are in fear of truly like losing your job and your ability to take care of other people that you have to, it's not worth it. And if it's really impacting you, just dusting your resume off and start looking around. So hopefully, pulling back from that line a little bit, if people are in a spot and they're maybe a little bit egotistical, trying like a Socratic approach I've found to be useful. So this is going to sound horrible and maybe a little manipulative, but like sometimes you can even almost put yourself in the position of looking for mentorship yourself, asking them how they would deal with a situation that could be too oblique if you need them to process it. Sometimes if you can couch it in a nice way, and this is maybe where empathy is also a big part of the cards in your hand, is if you can help that person understand, like if you can share a fact that did happen, and if you can ask them, depending on what the particular feedback is, like, what do you think, how do you think that makes other people feel, or how do you think that might make me feel, or things like that. Or maybe something more nebulous, like, what are some ways that maybe cause bad things to happen, or kind of helping them explore the network effects or the ripple effects of what I'm assuming is the negative thing that you wish this person would stop doing or do less of. So trying to ask nudging, prodding questions. There's also a point where you can just like, I don't know what's legal in Des Moines these days, but it used to be easy enough to just like find some weed, throw it in that dude's lap desk, and then call HR, be like, I think dude's got a problem, and the problem takes care of itself from there. So I'm not saying you should do that. You should never do anything illegal, but I mean, it would solve the problem.
Yeah, there's options. You have options. To build on not the weed part, but to build on the former part. I try to I mean, in general, this is sort of, I think, part of the consulting coaching practice that I think that I try to employ, which is I try to figure out where I'm aligned with someone. What is our similar goal? Because I want to try to find that agreement first, because we have the same goal. And then I try to use that as leverage to figure out how the feedback that I'm trying to give, like how the thing is affecting like my ability to achieve our similar aligned goal. So then that way the other person is invested in the outcome. So that is, to me, like that's sort of how I try to position it.
Dale Carnegie calls that the yes, yes. Get the other person saying yes right off the bat, where you are aligned with your goals. And, you don't want them saying no, you want them saying yes to make it more agreeable and to keep pointing in that direction.
Does it work even if you're getting them to say yes to something that they kind of sort of have to say yes to? Like, hey, we all want what's best for the company, right? Like they can't be like, no, actually, I just want my bonus. I don't know. Does that count? I mean, they're still saying yes. Does it work?
I think
I don't know psychologically.
Yeah. I think psychologically it supposedly does. Like it supposedly, I think there's studies that show that if you just sort of have this continual habit of like agreeableness, like it does tend to repeat itself. But I do think whatever the aligned goal is, I do think it has to be like specific also. Like I think like just better for the company. I think like I would try to choose something. So even with the person that the idea that's like above, the person can fire you, I would try to choose something that they care about, and maybe it is their bonus.
Nobody likes working for an asshole, right?
Yeah.
Neither one of us wants that. So could you stop?
I love it, except that they don't necessarily have to be working. Right? Yeah. That's what
I like this idea of repeated, like you could start like we're like, hey, penguins are cute, right? Hey, we shouldn't punch children, right? And you kind of just like, work your way into it. It's nice.
Yeah, it's like a sales strategy that they teach in like business school, right? Like you could do like door in the face strategy, right? So just say something like so audacious that they are gonna, they would bristle so much at it that whatever you say after that would seem reasonable, right? That's like another strategy. There's like 4, but like that's another one.
These feel like hostage negotiating hack.
Yeah. I mean, actually, in terms of negotiation, there are things like Zopa and why can't I remember the other one right now?
Mulligatawny.
BATNA and right? So BATNA is best alternative to negotiated agreement. And then Zopa is, and I can't remember what it is right now, but that in terms of negotiation, even with hostage techniques, these are actually also like.
Also not advocating that any of you actually take hostages.
Yeah, I agree.
That also might work. Zone of possible agreement.
That's right. Yeah, and when I learned about that, the example that they gave was an example with like it was a personal example, but I think the example that I learned about it was you have a close friend or significant other, and one of you really cares about where you eat dinner, and the other person really cares about the movie that you see. And so what makes sense is that the person that cares about dinner, they should choose where the dinner place is, and the person that cares about the movie should choose the movie because the other people don't care that much about it. So that's actually like the best negotiation, and everybody win. That is a win-win. Yeah.
Alrighty. No other takeaways. Any other questions?
I'd like to hear your thoughts on the other question there about feedback with someone you don't know.
Oh, it's interesting because, answered it. Oddly, I feel like that's the easiest one. Are you ever going to see them again? That was a serious question. Sorry, I know it's
Yes.
really hard to tell with me. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. How would you go about this, Charlotte?
If I don't know them, I think I always, and this is, I definitely think this is a part of my personality, but I try to gauge the safety level first. So I'm always trying to sort of figure out, like, how much do I think that they would be willing to hear, right? And so I know we're speaking very like abstractly right now, so I'm trying to think of someone that I don't know that I'm trying to give feedback to, and so maybe that's like a stranger in the street or something like that. So yeah, I always start with something neutral. I always start with just gauging to see how friendly they are and how open they might be for the conversation, because that to me gauges whether or not like what I'm going to say can even be heard. And I think I also just try to say things from my point of view, because I do think that that person may be having a really bad day too, and they may not even recognize the intended consequences of their behavior. But yeah, so that's, I guess those are sort of like two things that I try to employ. What about
One of the things that I've found, and this doesn't always work, but it seems to be my best chance, is if I'm having a conversation, to get a chance to listen to what the person thinks a little bit, and to open myself up for feedback as well, where I will be very open to say, look, I'm always looking to learn. What feedback do you have for me? And sometimes that person takes the opportunity after they spoke to me to reflect and go, oh, well, what about me? Did you observe anything? Sometimes that works, but not always. Sometimes when I open up the opportunity to be critiqued, I'm there for a while.
But that's a good point. Like extensions of vulnerability, like those go both ways, and that can be good. I guess one of my, I guess a follow-on question that I would have to this question would be how much is timeliness a factor? Like, is this the kind of feedback that, I guess on one hand, I feel like if it's big and important and impactful, in a weird way, that might make it easier, because in theory, there should be more examples and more facts that you can share. It's like, hey, this, and this thing happened, and that caused these, and these outcomes. And if those really aren't up for debate because they're big and impactful, then maybe that's easier. But if it's not as big and impactful, I do wonder if it's the kind of thing where, maybe you could set up a couple of sessions if that would be appropriate, or if it's not appropriate to like set up sessions, can you create an environment where you can build a rapport with this person over multiple interactions over time and get to a point where the less impactful feedback would be easier to give? I don't know if those ring true or not.
Yeah, it's an ongoing relationship, an ongoing conversation, hopefully. All right.
Alrighty. Well, last but not least, slide 30, and kind of our little mantra is to be responsible, be authentic, and be thoughtful. Keep reflecting on that, and if you try to do the best you can, you'll probably just get better and better. And I know it sounds really dorky, but if you're in some type of official role where feedback is part of the job or is expected to be part of the job, or if it's just something you want to get better at in whatever job role you have, find ways to practice. It does take practice. It is a skill, and you can get better at it. Even if you find like a feedback buddy to practice giving different kinds of feedback with, or if you have a small group of people that you can create a shared agreement about giving open and honest feedback for the intent of feedback practice. Even if you're in a position where you have direct reports, if you've got like a quarterly or annual requirement, meet with these people every week or two and just try to like start getting more practice in by just giving yourself more opportunities to do it. Any way you can get more practice in, because it is a skill that takes some practice to get good at, in my opinion.
Maybe someone here could be, maybe you all could buddy up or something too. It sounds like, you all have been thinking about this and you've had some experiences trying to figure out and get better at it. So that could be an idea.
Alrighty. Thanks, Dustin.
All right. Thank you both very much, Charlotte and Matt. This was very enjoyable. People, let's see. Oh, Matt doesn't have his Twitter on here. That's interesting. Matt's usually quite active on Twitter and loves feedback from there as well too. So if you were unsatisfied with everything that Matt said, feel free to tweet a compliment sandwich at him.
Also, if you're unhappy with anything I said, please feel free to tweet Matt also.
Yes, Matt is the proxy.
Also in a compliment sandwich. Wait, what is it again? Your Twitter handle, Matt? Is it?
It's
Matt
really it's at Matt Barcomb.
I don't get it. Could you explain that more clearly?
It's kind of a joke. It's based on my first and last name.
I don't really get it. Sorry.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
All right. And for next week, I see we're time. July 8th. July 8th. We got July 4th right around the corner. It blew my mind when I saw that. So July 8th at noon, we got Mike Vesey. I don't know how to pronounce that. Vesey. Decentralized identity and self-sovereign identity. So looks like a slight variation on our conversation today. Thank you, Charlotte and Matt, for showing up, and thank you for everybody attending. Like I said, I'll be sharing this out on YouTube. I may have to edit it a lot. And hope you all enjoy. Take care.